My question is, growing numbers of disabled people's employment is being affected by funding cuts to the Department of Work and Pensions Access to Work programme. How does the panel suggest disabled people collectively challenge the decision to secure future funding and employment for those who cannot work without support?
Right, it's very difficult to me because at the moment access to work is not for me. We're not age exhaustion. However, I need a drink every time I'm in lockdown. The mean, I'm not sure if it's about that or whether it's about a lack of awareness new law on the own policies. And I think at the moment we need to get a bottom for what actually goes on rather than what at the moment when you are actually about that, they say there is no cut. Just a coordination on some policies. No, I don't even know what I'm talking about at the moment.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, I'm not sure whether everybody in the room is probably aware of this, but in the last 6 months to a year, maybe longer, there have been innumerable disabled people who've had access to work support, which means they get money to support either having support workers with them or changing the working environment. And people have had their money cut by half. People have not been even told about it. And there's a very worrying increase in this development of people losing that access to work, which is key to keeping disabled people in work. We have a government who I'm fed of hearing want to get disabled people back into work, but at the moment they're not even supporting the very system they have available at their hands and their needs to enable disabled people at work. So it's quite astonishing to understand what this is all about. I can only see that it is another way of this government trying to make budget cuts and trying to, improve the so-called fiscal record. But I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with the policy that they have of getting disabled people. And I think it's appalling, really, after all the bad publicity that we've had from this government about being scroungers and disabled people not wanting to work, that this is happening. I believe we should have a real national campaign, like we've had for other issues in the past, where we get support of a national organisation, because something serious needs to happen. And it's no good individuals kind of responding or trying to challenge it, because there are individuals in this very room that try challenging their decision that their budget's being cut, and they can't even get through to talk to anybody. That's what's happening. There's like, as if it's purposely being kind of, I don't know, just to make sure that disabled people can change things. So I think there should be a national campaign, and disabled people should go on. And I think there needs to be more publicity on it to make sure that the general public know this is happening. They don't.
I just want to make the point that the government talk a lot about funding, but actually Ian mentioned that a couple of years ago they reorganised Remploy and they saved £18 million per year by doing that. Now, one of the recommendations of the government report was that £18 million should actually be put back into employment support for disabled people. But actually, the government have only put £15 million back into support for disabled people for access to work. So, the argument that somehow that is down to money is total rubbish, because actually they have about £60 million that has somehow just disappeared into the ether that should have actually been earmarked for supporting disabled people.
Just to pick up the question, which is how can you have a collective challenge, I guess I think everything that's been said about the issues and very, very eloquent people. I'd add to it a little bit and think a bit beyond that, particularly coming from one of the largest employers in the country, the NHS, and actually think where's the challenge, rather than just the welfare benefit state, that system is also to the employers. And actually, how do we pick that challenge up, and how do we get people to make employment more accessible, rather than just actually how do we help people get into that system? I think that's to add to what's been said already, and we have to take that in the challenge.
I just wanted to say that I've actually been in receipt of access to work, and one of the things that when I first had contact with the DWP, which was quite some time ago now, was I found that it was very antiquated and old-fashioned. I was very surprised at how old-fashioned it was. And we've just been talking about radical approaches and looking at more innovative ways of supporting ourselves, of enabling independence. And I think that there is a money issue and people have had their access to work cut, but I think we also need to look at coming up with new solutions to supporting ourselves. And interestingly, when personalisation was first introduced, I mean, it's not a new concept. I mean, I think we've been talking about it for years, but one of the initial ideas relating to personalisation was that access to work would become part of the budget that somebody received, so that all areas of somebody's life were absorbed into a budget. So we've got a health and social care budget now. So why don't we have a health, social care and DWP budget, so that actually somebody's got control over all the resource that gets fed, that comes into their bank balance once a month, so that they can spend it how they want to support themselves to live independently.
In terms of access to work, it is possible to have access to work as a direct payment, as it were. So just as a point of information, that is possible. I think, is anybody else on the panel burning?
It's not publicised very much.
No,
so,
I agree.
And I think that's the really important thing. It should be available for everyone.
Okay. I just want to go to the panel and say, do any panel members, anybody who hasn't spoken, does anybody want to speak? I'd like to say thanks to Bernie, a very good issue to start with, very current issue, very worrying. And I don't know whether the panel would agree with me, but I think it's one that, it's a winnable, it's very arguable, winnable. I hope it's winnable. Now there was a hand up there. Could we just? I don't know who that was. Somebody wanted to say something. Teresa.
I just wanted to come back on the point about the issue around access to work being available as a direct payment, not being publicised. And actually somebody, I can't remember what conference I was at, but somebody from the DWP actually said that to me about either earlier on this year or end of last year, that it's going to be available as a direct payment, but then actually contacting Access to Work, it wasn't me, somebody else contacted Access to Work in their discussion, said, can I have it as a direct payment? And they were absolutely not. So actually it's not just that it's not publicised, it's
that's absolutely a bogey, but
yeah, but it's there's so little awareness, and I think it's a lot to do with staff being moved around, not actually having kind of the same sort of dedicated access to work advisors, people moving roles all the time, trying to do so many different things that people just aren't aware of their own service.
My question is about the delightful comment that Lord Freud made about the worth of working disabled people. And my question is, could this be used to open a debate about underrepresentation of disabled people in the workforce?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about employment, and also the Lord Freud comment was totally unacceptable. However, I do think there is a wider discussion to be had around how we do actually get disabled people, and indeed anybody actually, into the workplace. And I do maybe getting a bit controversial, but I do actually think there may be a place for some kind of work experience, internship, volunteering, so that people maybe don't necessarily get the minimum wage, but they're actually given that experience and the chance to see what it's like to work in the workplace, to be able to work out what reasonable adjustments may need to be made in order for them to have a fulfilling job, and also to look at more flexible working practices so that people don't necessarily feel they have to do a 9 to 5 job Monday to Friday. So we need to look a lot more at how we can encourage people maybe just to work 2 or 3 hours a week maybe, or maybe work on a freelance basis or a contract basis, so that when their impairment deteriorates or when it's fluctuating, they can choose how much work they do and how much work they don't do. So, and I say, obviously, his comments were totally unacceptable. However, I do think we need to get away from the model of working full-time or not working at all. We do need to look at work as being a much more flexible thing moving forward.
I agree with you entirely, Robert, but I also think we need to put it into employers' hands to give disabled people a chance, because let's be honest, if you have 10 people go for an interview and there's one disabled person, I know they're not meant to, but they will take the able person who needs a disabled out. So I think employers ought to give us a chance as well.
Completely agree with it. I believe everyone can work, but in the way Robert suggests that we have ability to work, whether we can work in a normal way, in a different way. What they need is my hourly rate is £100 per hour. So our idea disabled people over less is rubbish. And I think we need to get away from the medical model idea of work. What worries me more is the welfare activists can disagree with what Lloyd said, but at the same time believe disabled people can't work and shouldn't work. I think we need to challenge the idea of what we mean by unfit, what we mean by welfare. You know, I think it is everyone can work in their own way. I think with employers, they are not all the villains, and we need to work with them to explain how they can help us, help them to help us.
Just leading on from what both of my fellow panellists have said, I think it was clearly a completely unacceptable comment. But the thing that I found quite depressing was that it didn't spark a debate around actually what do we mean, what do we need. And I think someone from the audience made a comment earlier on around we seem to be going backwards really nationally, where we have a narrative where we're talking about disabled people being vulnerable and needing to be protected and being homogenous as a group. And I think that was the disappointing thing for me, that actually the focus wasn't on tackling that as an issue. It was just about the unacceptable comment of a very silly man.
One of our basic rights, we talk of adequate income as a right. With such varying needs, how should we decide what is adequate and who should pay for it, e.g. the state, the employer, families, etc.?
I think that is a really profound question, and there isn't a simple answer to it. I think we have to ensure that people get their basic human rights met, and there needs to be resources available, whether that's through a combination of state support, earned income, and the two main sources, so that people can can achieve the basic human rights that everybody else in society can, and it is going to be different for every individual, and I think to some extent that's where the personal budget bit falls in, and we should be able to support people are earning whatever amount of money, but they have needs over and above what they can earn to support themselves and live the life they live. We need to have that combination, and I think it's going to be a constant conundrum. We're not going to be able to say there's a fixed figure because everybody's needs are going to be different, but I think what we need to always go back to is the basic principles of equality and basic human rights. Is, you know, are people able to live the life that everybody else would expect to, in terms of their basic civil liberties and rights? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is a very, very profound kind of question, and I would agree what Ruth said. It's a combination of both, so you know, state support and plus employers as well, you know, and getting people back into work. But what I find really disturbing at the moment is the fact that it's not a question of people getting an adequate income. I mean, what's happening at the moment? People are becoming more impoverished. People are becoming poor. You know, poverty is the issue at the moment. And at the moment, disabled people are becoming poorer, and that is the big battle we have to stop that happening. Because I mean, it's a very slippery slope, and at the moment, a lot of people are slipping down that slope much more than they ever have been before. You know, with the bedroom tax and the welfare reforms and everything that's happened in the last during the austerity measures. And so I mean, whilst for sure we need to ensure people get adequate income, but at the moment I think our primary task is to make sure that poverty doesn't get any worse.
I think you need income. You got income and you got additional cost. I believe that additional cost is a mixture of basic rights and doing things. So if you work, you need the rule. If you don't work, you don't need the rule. I think in short we have resolved the difference between income and needing additional cost. It can be very different and it's a very complicated issue.
My question is, what are the best strategies for protecting disabled people's organisations' campaigning role at a time when they need to be more enterprise focused in order to survive? So it's really a question about balancing campaigning and roles with enterprise and service delivery roles.
I think it's an interesting question, and I think it's one that's increasingly becoming relevant to the conversations that as commissioners or as local authorities we're having with our partners and providers. What I would hope is that actually we're mature enough that the two aren't mutually exclusive. So I would expect that organisations that we contract with to provide services or that are looking at different ways of delivering services would retain that focus and that duty really to challenge on behalf of people who use the services that they provide. And we should be, and I'm not saying we are, but we should be as a sector mature enough to keep those things distinct and separate in our minds so that one doesn't impact on another.
I mean, this question actually has been at the heart of the independent living movement since it began. I went to Berkeley, California in 1981, and the big debate at that time was, do CIL, Centres for Independent Living, remain advocacy, campaigning political organisations, or do they become service providers, providing services to make enough money? And I mean, it's still the same issue. Same issue is still here, but it's got a lot more difficult at the moment, particularly at the current times with the the cutbacks, the people that are experiencing, from local authorities or from the government, in being able to survive. So there's more of a push now to find ways that organisations can become enterprising and can come up with new ideas and can support themselves to be able to. But my feeling is, Spectrum or any CIL, as far as I'm concerned, has to be both. Because by being a service provider, by being an enterprise, they can employ disabled people. They can bring disabled people in, and they can also enable developing, you know, sort of role model people, to try and bring in new generations of disabled people to become active in that scene. And at the same time, we can't avoid campaigning, we can't avoid lobbying. So I mean, you know, it has to be a mixture of the both. It has to be a mixture of activism and realism, in a sense that, you know, we live in a world where we need income and we need organisations to have come up with creative, innovative projects to make things happen.
Yes, I was going to say a similar thing to John, that it's not a recent thing. This is I think a perennial problem that has addressed both the independent sector and local authorities, and how we work with organisations that both provide services and yet will maybe campaign against the organisation that's funding the services that we've commissioned. And like Helen, I do think it is about a maturity of debate and discussion, and does require a degree of collaboration and understanding on both sides, and an acceptance that at times there are going to be fundamental disagreements, and that doesn't necessarily bust the partnership that you have to deliver support to people, but I think it does require a kind of degree of emotional maturity across the piece. I think the other thing, though, going forward is, I mean, we talk about independence and resilience in terms of personal capacity. I think we really need to address issues of independence and resilience organisationally, and move to a position where, and I know this is the case for a lot of organisations, where there isn't a complete dependence on government funding, that there is some resilience, so that should those relationships, if those relationships do break down for whatever reason, or there is a decline in that collaborative partnership approach, it doesn't actually bust the organisation. And I think that's tough in these times when money is really short, but I think a healthy debate about how do you build independent, resilient organisations not dependent, particularly in my case on local authority funding, is one that I think we've already started engaging with SCIL, and it's something that we need to continue to do so, because I think I am a bit pessimistic about the future of local government funding, and if we build organisational dependency on that source of money, then we're heading for a difficult place in the future.
Yeah, just very quickly, I want to agree particularly with what Ruth said, and I also think it's really important that although we obviously want to work closely with the local authority, I'm a great believer that we're a voluntary sector organisation for a reason, and I don't think we want to become a mini local authority. And I would, you know, and that may sometimes mean some tough choices have to be made, and certainly spectrum in the car, and have to make them very difficult decisions about what contract to go for and whether that compromising our principles. But and like I say, I think the last thing that we were wanting in 10 years' time to kind of say, well, isn't it great that we're still going, but actually outside everyone's just viewing on a mini department of a local authority, which I think would be a very detrimental thing for everybody.
Hello, yes, I'm Ed Bolton from Hampshire County Council. It's a related question, really. We know that user-led organisations have played a key role in progressing the independent living agenda through shaping national and local policy, and a lot of work's gone into putting a lot of that policy in place. And now there is, it feels, a greater emphasis on the role user-led organisations can play in delivering services themselves. So in today's climate, with this kind of increasingly competitive tendering environment and diminishing grant funding, what do the panel think that the key challenges and solutions might be for ULOs to put themselves in the right position as sustainable service providers?
How do ULOs best position themselves and prepare to be sustainable service providers? So in the sector, so it's how to get contracts, how to keep them.
I would probably say that actually that's not the right challenge, politely putting it in. I don't think it's about contracts in the future, and I don't think it's about winning or maintaining contracts. I think it's about how we look at what Ruth mentioned, which is building a sustainable sector, whatever that consists of. So independent, voluntary, private, all of that. We need to look at different ways that we use the funding that we have available, and creative ways. So I think for a user-led organisation, your absolute strength is your user-led. So you're saying exactly what people want. So we spend a lot of time talking to people who use our service and their families, asking what they want. You already know. So really we need to kind of build on that and look at how we use that money in a more creative but also a longer term fashion. So a big thing for me is that traditionally the way that local authorities in particular have contracted is with very short term funding or those grant arrangements. That doesn't build sustainability.
Thanks very much for that response, but the question was specifically about the fact that if we can't rely on long-term funding and contracts, and grant funding isn't going to be there, where will the funding come from to support organisations? So, I think it's a very eloquent response, but in terms of the actual question, like, where's that money going to be found from? I'm not saying it needs to come from local authorities or necessarily from grant pots, but I just wanted some views as to what other potential more radical ideas there might be.
I don't think any one person is going to have the answer to that. I think one of the things that has struck me as we've spoken today, various people have spoken, is around the fact that there are still all these different departments and funding streams, and that we haven't gone as far as I think we could have done in bringing that funding century together and using it more creatively. I don't think that's a small challenge, so it's a glib thing to say, but it can't be insurmountable.
No, I go back to my time travelling in America, going around the Centres for Independent Living, and there have always been issues on funding CILs right from the start. They're a bit more paramount now because of the economic conditions. But Judy Heumann, who was one of the original executive directors of the Centre for Independent Living in Berkeley, California, who now ended up working for the World Bank and also as a policy advisor to the Obama administration in America, one of the leading activists, said to me when I asked her, look, we've got problems, where do we get the money for? Do we be purist and not go to charity, or do we just raise money other ways, or do we provide services? And she said, John, you just get the money where the hell you can get it. You don't start thinking in those terms. You just go for whatever you can go for. And that really, I think, brings us around to know, yeah, we should, come up with some creative ideas. The money's not there with the state, the money's not there publicly anymore. There's businesses, but how do we get businesses involved? There's whole more areas. And yeah, whether we like it or not, we still use charities. The lottery and all the other sources that are there for us. But it's not easy, we know it's not easy. But then one more other point, to go back to commissioning and tendering, what really annoys me is when organisations, user-led organisations, tender for a contract. What worries me is the people who are making the decision in the local authority or whatever it is on that contract. Because some decisions have been made recently in the last few years in this area, where the experts in the field, like the ULOs, who know what direct payments there is about and know what other issues of disabled people are about, lose the contracts to other organisations that are the developing charities of the day, who are becoming bigger and bigger, and have the expertise and the people to put in the funding applications, probably in a more efficient and business-like way, more than ULOs who get the money at the end.
I just wanted to challenge this idea that we're not going to have any contracts in the future, because actually there will still be public money spent. There may be less public money spent, but actually, in reality, there's still going to be quite a lot of public money spent, and we won't be in recession forever. It might be still quite a while, but it won't last forever. And I think where there is public money being spent, and certainly in the NHS there's still quite a lot washing about, even though people may feel less than it was. It needs to be spent in a way that ULOs actually do get a fair crack of the whip, as John said, and that one of the bits of how to make it work that I can offer from my experience in my working life in Camden is that the voluntary organisations and the bit that I run, which is the Health Watch, which has got some statutory powers to challenge those statutory partners, is working together to say it really is about time you sorted out your procurement so that you remove these roadblocks that face ULOs and other voluntary organisations. And it really is about developing a shared vision of what you're trying to achieve through your procurement. And I really want to push back on the idea there's no money. There's less money, there's a lot less money, it doesn't mean there's none.
I agree with Francis. I was just going to put in though that I think when we're thinking about this, there's a paper that was produced by John Glasby, who's Professor of Health and Social Care at Birmingham University, and Bob Rhodes, who I know has got some quite radical views, and it's called Turning the Welfare State Upside Down. And that, I think it's definitely worth a read in terms of viewing particularly the welfare state as rather than a burden on society, but actually seeing the economic value of it, and that the fact that there is a lot of money and economic power within the services that and the levels of support that we need, and we need to turn our thinking the other way around and recognise the amount of money that is flowing around the system, the amount of purchasing power, particularly if personal budgets really took off, in an exponential way, the amount of purchasing power there will be, or could potentially be, in society, that poses opportunities for funding things in a different way. So I think there is scope. I don't know how we start that debate, but I think there is scope, building on the thinking of Glasby and Rhodes, to think about how we can fund what we want to fund in a radically different way.
Basically, it's I think a lot of organisations, because they're dependent on their kind of being a service provider, they spent a lot of time kind of firefighting to keep that service provision element going. Contractors are expecting kind of more of them for less money, and so they're spending their time delivering that contract. So many organisations actually, although they want to do the kind of campaigning work, the actual telling, everybody telling us about what disabled people's experiences are, actually they need to do that to evidence a need for the services, etc., etc. They just kind of don't necessarily have the capacity to do it. So we need to look at ways of us being able to do that collectively. For example, could we do things on a more regional basis? Things like gathering evidence of what's happening to disabled people. And I think of things like the research Spectrum have recently done about the cuts, impact of the cuts for disabled people. So we say more that we could be doing regionally to actually highlight those sorts of issues that provide data that organisations can use to evidence a need, and therefore evidence funding applications. So that's building on what, the kind of coming in on what you've just been talking about.
I think from a Commission perspective, there's certainly a move to really challenge ourselves, and we have done it recently. How do we enable small organisations that wouldn't normally have the capacity to take on some work, and how do we support them and work with them to manage through those risks that they face? And I'm really pleased that we have been able to do that. In terms of where funding comes from, we have to, I think, keep in mind that with the Care Act and with the changes coming through the health and social care system, the relationship isn't going to be those who receive from the welfare state, but it will also include an awful lot of self-funders and how they come into the market and how the market works. So don't look to the one audience thing there. And I think the other point that's been picked up is the relationship won't necessarily be with the commissioners directly, it will be with the individuals who commission you, and we heard a lot earlier about that collective commissioning. So I think that's the landscape that's shifting, and as commissioners we need to work in that changing landscape, and with user-led organisations we're learning from them as much as kind of contracting them, and that's the change I think that's going on. Sorry.
The organisation of this event, I have to say, is absolutely impeccable. I asked my question ages ago, and when I got here I was a bit panicked because I couldn't remember what it was. But no matter the organisation, everything is sorted, and here it is. So, thank you for a superbly organised event. How can the independent living movement reach out to involve and be relevant to all impairments and experiences.
Okay, the question. I think one thing it's not been very inclusive to younger people. I'm looking around a young activist in the independent living. I've been doing 20 years. I think it is about looking at do people actually want committees anymore? Is it about I argue a lot on social media for everyone that knows me knows, and I think social media is a way of getting more people involved. In fairness, we need to help people understand the social model. It's not about wheelchairs. And you know, not Johnny or even or even about helping her environment where how independent living can work for them. And about changing our own attitudes, talking more about environment, being more honest about who we are as individuals, so we can learn from each other.
I don't want it to sound glib, but I think we just got to stop talking about it and actually just get out and do it, really. They are out there, all these people, you know, we're all mainly kind of white, kind of fairly ordinary wheelchair users and other people with other impairments, but actually it's not like there aren't black people out there. There are gay and lesbian people out there. There are disabled people from the traveller community out there. And I'm going to nick an anecdote from somebody in the audience who actually worked for a local authority. And they were talking about hard to reach people, and an older woman, I think from the black and minority ethnic community, stood up and said, "You say that I'm hard to reach, but when I don't pay my council tax, they seem to find it quite easy to reach me." And that really stuck with me. That actually, you know, we do know where they are. We just got to go out and talk to them, and actually coming up with policy documents and complicated things like different formats and stuff like that. Obviously they're important, but let's just get out there and talk to people.
I just want to challenge you a bit more. I'm sorry. But the purpose of my question, really, and maybe I should just emphasise the impairment and experiences bit. For example, and I'll give you for example so I can try and clarify my point, is that we have an independent living strategy group nationally, and there's quite a few people that come along to it, so it's not just Disability Rights UK people. And at our last meeting, we had a discussion about the proposed piece of legislation that has been sparked by the experiences of an 18-year-old called Laughing Boy, whose actual name is gosh, I can't remember his first name. Sparrowhawk is his second name, anyway. And he died in a treatment and assessment centre for people with learning disabilities, and some people might be familiar with this. And I think what was slightly depressing about the presentation and the talk about the bill was how it seemed like they didn't want to get together on a general piece of legislation to bring Article 19 into UK law, but how sometimes I think, if we're honest, we haven't always talked to everyone across the independent living and choice and control agenda.
I know where you're coming from now. That's one the difficulties are landlords are very different ways to disabled people. I think if we believe in independent we need to make it for every impairment. I mean, start challenging the landlord, almost ethnic minority of the learning disability, not live, sing and play together. I think it's time we challenge the organisation who all think are quite politically correct, are actually quite that way in a gene of independent, mostly because they're all service providers. Don't want to let go of the South. I think we can do a lot more in this. They know it's time we got this sorted.
The way forward might be to get disability issues and these sorts of issues in the national curriculum in schools. I think it would just be a phenomenal way of making all those disabled children kind of aware of their own identity. But just a thought from the chair. Now, John.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick one. But this is a very, very important question. I mean, I don't want to, move it quickly, but I mean, often, as Robert says, people are there, but it's getting to them. And often the issue with most of the ULOs, I think, today is capacity. It's having the capacity to be able to do it and the resources to do it effectively enough. And it's not easy. I think we're all, one thing we have to keep on reminding ourselves as the independent living movement is that we must be inclusive. And we must be ensuring that these people, they're hard to reach, people from ethnic backgrounds, all the different groups, they have to be part of the big picture. Independent living was never exclusive. It just happened to start with physically disabled people. And it has broadened out. And I do work in Europe a lot. I have done over the last 20 years. And this country is a lot more inclusive in bringing other groups in than many other European countries. I was on the board of directors of the European Disability Forum for 10 years. I kept telling them, where are the black people on this? We've got 28 different countries from Europe here. Where are the black people? Where are the people with learning disabilities? Because they're not present, but they are much more present in this country. But it doesn't mean, saying we can't stop, because we have to keep on going. And capacity is a big thing. Resources, having the people to be able to do it. But I can give you one positive example. As part of the European Network for Independent Living, which I'm also working with, in the last 2 years has set up a youth group. And it is so inspiring to see that youth group develop. And there's young disabled people from about 12 different countries part of that group. And it makes me feel like, some of us can start standing back and letting these people take over, because they're all very competent and they're all very enthusiastic. And Spectrum, for some of you who don't know, held a needle study visit here with some of these young people a few months ago. And I think Spectrum got as much out of it as the young disabled people from Latvia, Estonia, Greece, and a few other countries. But here were people, it was very, very moving. Young disabled people taking over the understanding what independent living was about. And it just felt that there's a future there. So that's a good story, despite we still have a lot more work to do.
In the early days of SCIL, we used to actually go out. I remember distinctly going down the motorway in Simon's little car. He had like a Popemobile, it was one of the first ones, and Albert Schlick driving, and we would actually go to residential care institutions and talk to people, and some of it was actually very upsetting. I remember once I asked a woman if I could use the public phone, and she said, "Oh, I think it's over there somewhere." I said, "Well, how do I use it?" She said, "I don't know. Nobody ever phones me up." And it turned out that she was taken there 20 years earlier for a 2-week trial, and that was it. She was left. And so some of it was really, really upsetting, but it got us into places where disabled people were. And a lot of the young disabled people who were in institutions were very scared that their parents would like lose their car, because even though they couldn't drive, their parents would use their car to come and visit them once every month or whatever it was. So there is other ways of doing it, like literally just knocking on the door and saying, "Do you know about independent living? You don't have to be here." And especially for older people now that they can get it as well, it's another way of doing it, just going there and telling them about it. I really felt like a missionary, but it was really good. It was really good, just to know that you could have maybe just got a few people out of residential care.
Some of the answer is sometimes we've got to be followers, not leaders. And sometimes if you want people to kind of come and play in your gang, you've got to know what's important to them. So thinking back to the LB campaign about Connor Sparrowhawk, actually if everybody who's involved in the independent living movement had put their support to that campaign about, publicising the injustice of what happened to that young man, how many people have actually, gone on Twitter or whatever and supported that campaign? I don't know. And if we wanted to get more deaf people involved, are we actually supporting their campaigns for recognition of BSL? And if we want to talk to the Somali community, are we talking about the immigration problems they're facing? And if you go and get involved in other people's stuff first and show that you understand it and support it, they're much more likely to want to come and talk to you about your stuff as well, and see how it relates to them. It's actually about getting something that relates to where they are at that particular day.
Well, thank you very much for that, Francis. I think that's something we can really all take home and just kind of reinforce our thinking about participating in other campaigns. One more little task for the panel, which is the question, and it's from Steve Holden, who's not here apparently, but the question is, if you were a firework, what type of firework would you wish to be? Or not be?
A sparkler, sparkling in
John's pinched it. I was going to say a sparkler,
Okay.
so a Roman candle.
This will get harder as we go along.
Yeah,
So I'm going to say Catherine will.
I'm going to be a rocket. I've got a lot of energy and I'd like to finish with a big bang.
I don't want to be a firework. I want to be a big bonfire.